Yo, what is going on, everybody? It is Tyler here, and today I am bringing you some more about the new EA College Football 25 video game that comes out in just about a month and a half, man. We're getting closer. The time is near, and today we'll be diving in to some Dynasty talk, man. Just another discussion, kind of like the one I did last week about Road to Glory. Just going over some details and tying it in to some series ideas or, just some different things you can do in the mode, depending on what type of team you go with. There's so many different ways you can go with so many different teams and many different conferences. And yeah, man, we'll, dive into some of the details, go over them kind of quickly anyways. And then mostly at the end of this video, we'll be going over the different teams amongst different conferences that not only I will be, considering to do for my Dynasty series, but as well as, maybe you, the viewer, might be interested in doing on your own at home. So yeah, we'll be going over, a lot of different teams and a lot of different ways you could go about, diving into Dynasty once this game comes out. So in the background, I'll probably just mix in some, maybe some old gameplay from my NCAA 14 series back in the day on the Third Sports channel, as well as, some different, screenshots and, little clips from the different trailers and deep dive gameplay videos we've gotten for this game. But yeah, we'll throw that in the background, man. But other than that, we'll be going over a couple articles today. I'll link them in the description down below, of course, if you want to read along yourselves. And a few of these things I definitely touched on in the previous video, man, but very, briefly. So we'll try to, dive in a little more. And like I said, we'll be tying this stuff into the different ideas and whatnot that you could do here in Dynasty mode this year. So, of course, you can go 30 years deep, which for some reason people were actually complaining about that, which I get it. You should probably be able to go deeper, but 30 years is enough if you ask me. I'm totally fine with that. And then you can have up to 32 user-controlled teams, both in online and offline. So if you wanted to, control a lot of what happened on your own, you can, use up to 32 teams. And then even for online, you can have up to 32. So that's pretty cool, man. I'm definitely not going to be doing no online Dynasty this year. Just simply don't have the time. A lot of my buddies are on Xbox, by the way, and I'm on PlayStation. So one of the few things that isn't crossplay in this game is this online Dynasty. So that's quite unfortunate. I do have some people on PlayStation that are running them as well, but I'm just not going to have time for something like that. But either way, I love that you can go 30 years deep. I think that is good. I get it. Some people want more years, but I think 30 is plenty enough, especially for, the first time this game being back in, over a decade. And, of course, you'll get the custom conferences back as well where you can realign those. And, of course, that's got to be a thing as, we're still seeing these conferences change every year. And this upcoming season being one of the most wild ones. And I'll definitely tie in, some of that with, my series ideas because I think, doing some of the teams that are either in new conferences would be interesting, or picking a team that's in a conference that had a lot of shakeup, where we might have a lot more question marks than there were before. Like for example, the Big 12 without Oklahoma and Texas could get kind of wild. And then also you can edit the rules amongst that conference as well, which I'll definitely be taking advantage of that with the example they gave us here. One of the biggest things in college football is the SEC, man. Why do they still only play 8 games? It's crazy. Now, they are talking about actually going to 9, so it is nice that in the game you will be able to change this if you wish to do so, and I am definitely going to do that. Definitely going to be taking SEC to 9 games, probably after the first season at least, but definitely nice to see that you can edit some of those rules, man. But yeah, SEC, you're crazy. Especially the way these mega conferences are forming at this point, with the Big Ten and SEC definitely being clearly on top. If you keep adding more and more teams, how are you going to keep just playing an 8-game schedule? It's like, why? What's the point of adding all these great teams and, making your conference better if you're not even going to play each other? You guys are scared. Definitely a few things on coaching that I want to touch on. So the skill trees and archetypes I briefly mentioned last time. So you'll choose between 3 archetypes: motivator, recruiter, or tactician. And then after that, you'll be given, some different strengths and weaknesses within 11 different skills trees that you'll gain attributes in. So it'll be interesting to see, how those work. I think it'll definitely be different from what we saw from the skills trees back in NCAA 14. But it'll, be one of those things that we just got to test out as the game comes out and see, how those work. amongst the different archetypes there. We'll have to see, how important it is to decide between those three, how much of an impact it really has. Because depending on what type of rebuild you're doing, or if maybe you're not even rebuilding, you could just be doing a dynasty in general. You might be taking over a great team. You might not need to be that great of a recruiter if you're, taking over a lot of good talent. Who knows? Just throwing some different things out there. And that ties into the coaching carousel, also known as, staff hiring and firing. So that being back in the game definitely opens up some opportunities, man. So not only can your coordinators, get poached by other schools, but you yourself could get offers to become a head coach or coordinator at other schools as well, depending on how successful you are. And who knows, maybe there's a way you can put it out there that, you're not going nowhere and you might not get as much interest. Who knows? We'll have to see, like I say, it's just another thing we'll have to test out and see how it works once the game comes out. So your coordinators also will have skill trees, which was the same as back in the day. So you got to think, if they continue to build up their skills trees, man, they're going to get offers from them other schools, like I said, especially if, you start, winning some games, having a couple good seasons, them guys might end up out the door. And tying back into the skills trees, of course, anything that you as the head coach might lack in, you can then, have your coordinators, maybe they're good in those areas where you're not. So that way your weaknesses are their strengths and, kind of balance some of those things out. Or, maybe you just overpile certain areas and just completely dominate in a couple of those topics. And that's another thing you might want to do also. If your coordinators aren't, performing up to the potential that you want, then you could fire them. Hit that coaching carousel, find you another guy. Maybe they have better skills trees. Who knows? There's all sorts of different things that could happen amongst this coaching carousel. Also, a series idea you could do. Something that I might do, way later in the year. This is something down the road possibly, but could do, the coaching carousel series where, you sign with a different school every year as the coach. You try to, go on a run with a different school each year and then pack your bags onto the next university. So, lots of fun, lots of different things you could do here with the coaching carousel. And, just like in the portal, man, just like I mentioned in the Road to Glory, if your coach, gets hired somewhere else, you might want to follow him to that school. Just like here in Dynasty, if you decide to, leave for a different school as the head coach, sign somewhere else, some of your players might all be hitting the portal and some might be trying to follow you there. So, that's definitely some things to, look at. All right, a little more on the recruiting here. It says each year will feature 4,000 prospects. You'll have 32 5-stars. Pitch grades will also be back with 14 in total, including proximity to home, playing time, sending players to the NFL, brand exposure, and more. And many recruits will have deal breakers where they won't consider your school if you don't meet the required grade in certain areas. So this makes sense, of course. Every player is going to be different, and not all of them are going to have deal breakers, which is nice because, not every guy is going to be like that. Whereas, some guys being close to home might be super duper important, where some guys it might not matter at all. It also lets you know that athletes are back in that recruiting cycle, of course, so that way, you could, possibly use them on both sides of the ball, maybe. Now, I'm sure once you actually sign this player, you got to pick which position you want them to play. So if they're, a receiver and corner, once you get them, maybe you have to pick one or the other. Or, maybe in the depth chart, even once you pick a position, maybe you can still throw them on both sides. Maybe that'll be a thing, who knows. But they at least let you know the athletes are back that play 2 and possibly even 3 different positions. Which that makes sense because that happens a lot in high school where guys will play running back and receiver, or guys will have some time at quarterback and some at receiver, or, different things like that. A lot of, high schools out there will have 2 different quarterbacks, so, one of them might not want to be off the field all the time and might, play a little receiver as well, or, all sorts of different things. And you might be a linebacker and a safety hybrid because that's something, in high school. A linebacker might be more of a strong safety in college, depending on what type of competition you're playing and whatnot. So that's, something that'll be back in recruiting is the athletes. And it looks like you'll, be able to look at your team needs, positional needs, and different recruiting menus and whatnot, as well as which players are at risk of transferring. So I'm sure that this might, be tied into not just the high school players that you're recruiting. It might tell you, how likely they are to, jump ship and transfer after a year or two, or maybe this is more so just for the players that are currently on your squad that are, thinking about transferring, or who knows, maybe if you bring in too many guys at one position, it'll make it more likely for a guy you already had on your roster to want to transfer out. So yeah, the transfer portal being tied into Dynasty now, definitely going to be huge. I mean, we had transfers, back in the day. It just wasn't as prevalent. Usually had to sit out a year. And in the game, it wasn't very easy to, get these things in there. And it was very rare every once in a blue moon you'd see, a transfer. So there it says that you can see the transfer portal screen in there as well, but it won't be open until the off season. It sounds like the recruiting process is a little, hybrid of, what we saw back in the day compared to, our very last game, a decade ago for NCAA 14, where it was pretty simple, man. You just threw the points on and bada bing, bada boom, you kept it moving. It was just too simple at that point. I understood, not wanting it to be as time consuming as it was in the previous games, but I didn't mind that personally. I really loved the recruiting and whatnot. And I'm glad that it sounds like they found like a good medium here where they are kind of meshing together some of the old with the NCAA 14 system, where you'll, still be doing different pitches and whatnot, but I'm guessing you'll still have a point system where certain pitches might be certain points where you might want to, spend more time on a 5-star guy than a 3-star guy, or maybe spend more time on a guy that is at a position that's more of a need than another. Maybe it's a guy that you're looking to get in the starting lineup in his first year or two compared to a guy that might not be a starter until, third or fourth year. So you might want to spend more time, use more pitches on those guys. Again, another thing, we'll have to just see how it works once it gets here, but it sounds to me like the system is going to be pretty solid. So looking at the process, like I said, man, you'll assign different hours to recruits there. So they said it's pretty, comparable to 14, just a bit more detail, of course. So they'll have certain hours during the season for this recruiting process, and then in the off season, your recruiting hours will be both for your high school recruiting and the transfer portal recruiting. So definitely would be interesting to see how you are able to allocate your time, depending on if you want to go after more transfer portal guys or the high school guys. It'll definitely be interesting to see, the differentiating in the recruiting there. They actually have the early signing period in the game, which is nice, and that basically helps give you the portal opening, which happens the day after that early signing day. And also, speaking of the portal, make sure you leave open those roster spots for portal guys. Because if you ain't got no spots, you ain't going to be able to fill them with those portal guys, and you might end up wasting some time recruiting. Definitely sounds like it'll take some more time to unlock different things about your recruits as well, as you won't be able to get a guy's skills tree until you bring him on an official visit, which that sounds good to me, man. I mean, you can still find out a lot about a guy before you get the official visit, but being able to get a skill tree, definitely something you got to be deep into that recruitment to get, where, back in, 14, you could 100% scout a guy in like a week or two. It's kind of ridiculous, but either way, it's nice that it sounds like it's, going to be more of a process here in this game, and you actually got to, do more work and really grind out those recruitments. And of course, it mentions the cut line where, we're used to this, where, different stages of the recruiting cycle, guys will change their cut line. They'll have their top 10 and cut it down to top 8, top 5, top 3, etc. We've seen this before, so that will be back in the game. So I wonder if we'll see different prospects where some guys might already be down to their top 5 or top 3 early on in the year, or will it always be where everyone always has a top 10, then goes to a top 8 at a certain point, then, drops down later in the season. I think it'll be cool to see if, some guys are different, where they might already have a top 3 early on in the year, or some guys still might, be so wide open by the end of the year they're still at a top 8. Who knows, man? So we'll see how those things work. And I mentioned something here about the hours and seeing if it's dependent on staff skills trees or not. I would assume that there's definitely something in the skills trees with your coaches and coordinators that would help give you extra time with hours here. I don't think it would be anything too crazy, but at that point, if you're using that, you might be, sacrificing something that helps with the gameplay and your players on the field. So depending on where you're at in your rebuild, might be something you want to look at there, changing those abilities in the skills trees. Because if you can get some more hours for recruiting, you'll definitely want to do that early on. So it definitely sounds like they made it much tougher as we're back in the day, man. NCAA 14, if you wanted to, you could do a rebuild somewhat quickly. You could definitely go through some loopholes and get around some things and, start bringing in wild talent to, those very low-tier schools. But it sounds like that's not going to be happening no more. You'll definitely have to grind these rebuilds out. So, yeah, I'm definitely excited to see that, man. And I'm not, going to be doing any crazy long rebuilds at first. If I do, it'll be later on in the year, more of a simulation style thing where, we take, a low-tier program in a bad conference and build them up. But I'll talk more on that in a minute at the end of, the team talk where I dive in to, the different Dynasty teams that I might be playing with. But before we get into that, we got a few more details to go over. So more on recruiting, talking about the visits here. It says once a player locks in his top 5, you'll be able to bring him on a visit, and you will once again be able to design a recruit's visit to show him things that matter to him or hide the things that you're not highly regarded in. So, it sounds like you'll probably have like certain tasks that you can set, or, you might have like 3 or 4 different objectives that you do on the visit, and you might, decide of those 3 or 4 things amongst, 10 to 14 different things. They might all be tied to, the different pitches that you normally have, and it might just be, different activities that you can do that help give you a boost. So, yeah, that's once they lock in their top 5. That's when you'll be able to bring in that visit. So that's definitely something you'll have to keep an eye on. So early on, you probably won't be able to do that, which makes sense. It also says that it'll matter what game you bring them to, with the game's outcome impacting how well the visit goes. So, for example, if you bring a guy in against, number 2 Ohio State and you get a crazy big upset win, then that'll probably boost that recruitment a lot and help you get them closer to signing. Whereas instead you bring them to a game where you play like a UL Monroe and win, then granted, you still won the game, but you're not going to get as much of a boost since, the opponent was, not as big and, you pretty much did what you were expected to do. Now, if you go out and lose that game against UL Monroe, it'll probably very negatively impact that recruitment, I would assume. I also like this note here. The complimentary and competitive visits are also back, meaning bringing 3 quarterbacks to the same game will not go over very well. And on the flip side, if you bring a running back and an offensive lineman, you'll get a boost for that visit. So that's definitely nice to hear, man, because that should matter. You shouldn't be out here just bringing in guys all at the same position at the same time. It just doesn't make much sense, obviously. Whereas if you bring in maybe a corner and a safety, that'll be in the defensive backfield together. That should give them a boost. Now, talking about the transfer portal, I will note that the service academies like Army, Navy, Air Force, and whatnot can use it, which they can't in real life, which makes sense. But in the game, they will be able to, which again makes sense. It's a game. It's ain't real life. We're not actually, doing all that. But either way, that is nice to hear that everyone will be able to use that portal, which it will open, like I said earlier. It'll open as soon as the offseason starts, right after that early signing day. So along with that high school recruiting, it sounds like even if you don't land those guys out of high school, it will still matter if you build those relationships. Because say if a 4-star guy you missed out on goes somewhere and it doesn't work out, if they hit the portal after the first year or 2, you'll still have, that progress that you made with them from before, and they might be more likely to head to your school in that portal. If, you are trying to, reach out and get them through there, that is. But at least that's, a thing. It makes sense that if you already previously built relationships that would happen. And I know that also ties into if you were to leave a school, like I said earlier in the coaching carousel section. If you were to leave, it'll be more likely that guys will, come with you from your school because, the reason they went to that school might have solely been you, the head coach. Sounds like you'll be able to do pitches not only for high school recruits either, but as far as players not only on your roster, but also already in the transfer portal. So guys that are on your roster you might want off, you can actually encourage them to enter the portal to clear up your roster, which that sounds kind of wild. We'll have to see how that works. But also as far as, guys leaving early to go to the NFL or, wanting to leave to hit that portal, you'll be able to try to persuade them to stop from leaving, if that's what you want to do. Or who knows, you might want to, just push them out the door a little more. Players will enter the portal based on a number of factors, most notably how you are doing and holding up your end of the bargain with their deal breakers. So, of course, if you make promises and whatnot, you're actually going to have to follow through on those. Because if you don't, them guys are just going to hit the portal. And next thing you know, you might be known as a guy that's a liar. And then that might hurt your recruiting going forward. Thankfully, it says here that it does tell you, throughout the year, it'll let you know who's at risk of hitting the portal. So that'll be nice. You can make those decisions if you want to adjust how you are with that player to, try to get them to not do so. Or if, you're not worried about it, maybe you don't spend any time on the guy no more and you kind of just let him out the door. A couple things I've already mentioned, but might as well here as well. NIL, not in Dynasty mode. I still believe that it will be a part of recruiting as far as, a pitch for, brand exposure and stuff like that. I do think it will be in there in some sort of way. It's just I don't think the actual NIL system that we see in real life will be in. It's just a never-ending changing thing at this point. It is just all over the place. Thankfully, I do think we are headed in the right direction where I think there will be a lot more guidelines. It'll be a lot more controlled here soon. But yeah, it's just been an absolute roller coaster ride. Just an absolute craziness, man. So yeah, no specific NIL structure in Dynasty. I do think it will be in games going forward. Maybe not next year even, but once, it gets, more fine-tuned in real life, that's when I think we'll start to see it implemented in the game in a more real system rather than just having, the pitches for it or whatever the case may be. And then player editing also, the team builder being back is huge, and you should be able to create players whether it's in the game or in your team builder roster maker. But I believe if it's a player that opted out of the game, you probably won't be able to put their name. It'll probably be blocked, so you won't be able to put Arch Manning. So instead, maybe you just make Art Lanning. And, obviously people will be like, okay, well, that's, obviously Arch, but, it'll be interesting to see how they, put the handcuffs on the player editing stuff. In case you're, wondering if it's important to you, all the rivalry games are in the game. Yes, all of them. Like they even show here, the Georgia State-Georgia Southern game is in as the modern-day hate game. And if you have a trophy, it's in the game. So that's definitely good. The main thing, something else I've mentioned before with the awards and stuff, you'll have, records and different things that you can look at. You'll have a trophy case. Now, the trophies that will be awarded will not all be the real ones in real life. Now, they do have the Heisman, and I believe they do have some of the positional awards, but a lot of the main ones, like the Biletnikoff for the best receiver and the Doak Walker for the best running back, I believe are not in the game, but they will still have some sort of, trophy in there for you. It just isn't going to be the actual award, which is unfortunate, but not a huge deal. I'll try to briefly go over this next article here, try to breeze through it, man. It was pretty solid little Q&A, decent little interview from a reporter that was at that EA showcase a couple of weeks ago out there where, some reporters and different YouTubers and whatnot were able to go get a presentation on a game and able to play themselves. So I'll go over a few things here. I just love that they emphasize that, they're not too worried about Ultimate Team. Thankfully, man. A lot of people were worried about it, including myself, man. But, it'll be a part of the game. But sounds like Dynasty, man, like we're talking about today, has been their main focus. And it says here the biggest things for them have always been gameplay, sights, and sounds, man. And that's huge for college, man. The atmosphere, different game day traditions and whatnot. There's just so many different, like I said earlier, man, so many different schools and stuff that there's just so much different things that go on across the country every Saturday. And of course, the more faster gameplay and the different option offenses, flex bone, triple option, hurry up, slow down, walking mesh, they call it at Wake. So lots of different things that Madden wouldn't see, you are going to see here in this game. And that's, tied into Dynasty, the different offenses and stuff, playbooks. It'll be big time, whether you're, the offensive coordinator or head coach. It's going to matter big time in this college game. And they dive into the RPO talk, man. Definitely huge to see that implemented in this game, as RPOs were first becoming a thing back in the NCAA 14 days. So nice to see. This is one of the main things that you'll probably see taken from Madden. Other than that, man, everything should be pretty new. But that system, it just makes sense to take it from there, because it's done pretty decently, I would say. It's not perfect, of course, but I'm sure with this game they were able to fine-tune it the best that they could. Of course, it's played differently than it is in the pros anyways, so I'm sure that they will do a good job with those RPOs. They also talk here about how it'll be cool that we actually will get to see how the 12-team playoff is going to work in the game before we actually see it even happen in real life. So that's another thing, though, that could end up being a negative. They might, have this system wrong. I mean, I'm sure the system will be right as far as, which teams from each conference go and then the at-larges. But I just don't think that they'll have the computerized system matching, the human element in real life, where I'm sure we'll see, SEC and Big Ten get those at-large spots more deeply than any of the other schools, which will probably make sense, with, better schedules and tougher opponents and all that good stuff. But it'll be interesting to see in the game how the 12-team playoff works and, how different those at-larges will be. Because this stuff will matter in your dynasties, man, especially if you're, on the come up once you're hitting that spot where you're finally able to contend. Are you going to be, that 10th, 11th, 12th team getting in? Or are you going to, solidify yourself in that top 4, top 6 area? They go on to talk more about the recruiting here with how they had to, dial things back, and then they dialed it back too far, so now they're trying to find a happy medium, like I said earlier. I pretty much mentioned all the stuff that they went over in this Q&A. It's pretty solid, man. I'll link it down below, like I said. If you want to read it all, it's just going into a little more detail about some of the stuff that I just mentioned already. So I'll link that below, like I said, if you feel like reading that as well. So we'll go ahead and just dive in now, talking about the different teams that I myself will consider. And then, we'll talk about a few other, ideas possibly for, yourselves at home or whatever the case may be. But first, we'll start off in the Big Ten and the SEC, the Power 2 conferences. This is most likely where the team will be that I choose. Now, I plan on doing, my main dynasty is going to be most likely about 6 years. I would say it has to be at least 5. But I'm hoping to get 6 or 7 done. That would definitely be nice. Now, the reason you're not hearing me say 10 plus is because I'm going to be mainly a Road to Glory guy. Dynasty is going to be secondary to me, but I still want to have a really solid Dynasty series here on the channel. It's just nice to switch things up every once in a while, man, and I just don't want to end up getting too burnt out on the Road to Glory, or at least have something, to switch things up every once in a while. But yeah, man, so since I'm, more towards the, 5 to 6 or 7 years, I'm going to be taking a Big Ten or SEC team. I, would love to, take like a Sam Houston State or FIU or UL Monroe, something like that, and, do this long 10-plus year rebuild, try to, get them in a better conference, all that sort of stuff after getting, better recruiting and all that good stuff and whatnot. But realistically, just don't think that's something that I'm going to have enough time to do as far as playing goes. Now, I might, do a longer simulation style rebuild later on in the year and whatnot once I get, my first couple series done. But for now, I'm more so talking, for the dynasty that I'm going to be playing, So not just doing all the recruiting, but also playing all the games and whatnot. So quite time consuming. And yeah, we're looking at 5 to 7 seasons here. And that's why I'm going to be going with a Big Ten or SEC team. So that way I don't have to worry about, realignment at any point. And I can just, take one of the lower tier teams in the conference and try to build them up to, contend with those top tier teams like in the Big Ten. It's always ran by like Ohio State and Michigan. You see your occasional Penn State or, go back a decade and Michigan State was in there as well. You might even see, Wisconsin back then too, Nebraska randomly as well. But with the newcomers, it'll be interesting as well with Oregon, USC, UCLA, and Washington. I think Oregon the only real threat there immediately anyways. We'll see how the other teams do in the coming years. But that's another thing I want to look at too is like a lot of this stuff with the new teams and different conferences and whatnot. So could definitely see a lot of different cool scenarios with that. And also an idea there, instead of taking a team that you will eventually realign to a different conference, maybe you just grab one of the teams that just realigned this year. Because there's been a lot of movement, man. It's not over either. I think we'll still see over the next couple of years a lot of movement. And then, hopefully by like 2028 or so, we'll kind of have, more cemented conferences again. And the movement hopefully will, slow down a bit. But as far as the Big Ten teams go, man, the two main ones that I will be considering is Rutgers and Minnesota. A couple teams that both went 3-6 in the Big Ten last season. Both made bowl games, but still just rough years. And like I said, man, I'm not too worried about if they were bowl eligible or not recently. If they're not one of those top tier teams in these big conferences, then they're all viable to be, used for these dynasties, man. So yeah, Rutgers and Minnesota, a couple teams I'm very highly considering. And some other teams I think would be interesting here would be Indiana, Northwestern, and Illinois. Going over to the SEC, man, a few of the teams that I'm mostly considering here is Vanderbilt, of course. They've been bad for a long time. They're baseball school. Basketball sometimes too, but yeah, they focus on all their other sports, it seems like. But football, always down in the dumps, so definitely got to consider them. And then South Carolina, I think would be interesting. 3-5 in the conference last year, did not make a bowl. And then Mississippi State and Arkansas, a couple teams that just went 1-7 in conference. So definitely considering those two as well. Definitely liking Arkansas and Mississippi State a lot as options there. And a couple other teams in the SEC, Kentucky and Florida, a couple options as well. Kentucky definitely has been better recently than they were, years ago. Lots of ups and downs from them, though. It seems like they kind of have their random decent years and go back in the dumps. Florida, though, a team that I was used to being good. They were great for most of my life, and then they just haven't been able to figure it out lately, so that's definitely another team to consider there. Of course, the new teams in the SEC are Oklahoma and Texas. Definitely not going to consider doing those teams, but definitely think, it would still be interesting to do Oklahoma probably. Say Texas is a team that I'm expecting to, compete for the national championship this year. So like I said, I'll most likely be choosing between the Big Ten and SEC there, but I'll still talk about the other couple major conferences left, the ACC and Big 12. Quickly, I'll go over to Big 12, man, because I will say I will most likely not be messing with this conference because I just want to see what happens the first year without Oklahoma and Texas and kind of see how it goes because this conference kind of, has always beaten up on each other over the years and lots of flip-flopping around, year in and year out. The teams that are on the top half of the conference might be on the bottom half the next year. They're kind of all over the place, like TCU, for example. We're just in the national championship game a couple of years ago, and then last year they go 5-7, just 3-6 in conference. So TCU, a team to consider there. I also would consider BYU and Cincinnati. BYU just 2-7, Cincy 1-8 in conference last season, man. Houston and Baylor, a couple teams that also were really bad, just 2-7 in conference, but I'm expecting them teams to improve a lot this year. So I don't think that I myself would use them. I think the most intriguing team actually for the Big 12 would be Arizona State, a newcomer from the Pac-12. They were just 2-7 in that conference last year, 3-9 overall. So as a newcomer, I think that would be an interesting team to do. So if I were to attack the Big 12, I think Arizona State would be my most likely squad there. And other newcomers there is Arizona, Colorado, and Utah. Colorado, of course, they need plenty of work as well, but of course, I'll let Primetime continue to do his thing over there, man. He's got it handled. And lastly, the ACC. Definitely will be considering some newcomers here, man. You got Cal, SMU, and Stanford. Now, SMU probably the most impressive team last year out of those three, as they, won the AAC, going 9-0 there, 11-3 overall. So probably wouldn't do SMU, but it still is an interesting thing to look at, as this will be their first year in, one of the Power 4 conferences, or Major 4, Power 4, whatever you even want to call them at this point. I don't even think that's the thing. I think you got the Mega 2 with the Big 10 and SEC, then you got the next 2 with this Big 12 and ACC, then, the rest after that. But yeah, man, definitely interested in seeing what SMU does in the ACC this year. Probably won't do them myself, but still would be an interesting team to take over. Cal and Stanford, I definitely would be considering them. If I do the ACC, I will most likely do Cal or Stanford. A couple teams that struggled in the Pac-12 last year. Cal ended up making a bowl game, but still, man, just not good. And either way, man, we'll be looking to try to turn one of these squads into an absolute powerhouse, contending for those playoffs and national championships every year, man. So also in the ACC, I think Boston College would be interesting, man. They also went bowling, but just 3-5 in conference last year. Some other bad teams, Wake Forest and Virginia. Definitely some deeper rebuilds there. Georgia Tech, another squad similar to Boston College. Not completely terrible, but middle of the pack in the conference and could definitely use some work. Definitely would be interesting to take over the Yellow Jackets there. That's pretty much it for, the ones that I'm considering personally for my dynasty, for, my 5 to 7 year one that I'm playing. Again, remember I mentioned I will be interested in doing some deeper, rebuilds with simulation style much later on in the year, of course. But, we'll talk about a few other teams with that as well. But, I'll just go over them again because I want everyone to comment below. Of these teams, which one would you most likely me to do? Now, if it's a team that you want me to do that I didn't list, then by all means, go ahead and still comment that team below. But preferably, just vote on these teams. Now, this by any means isn't like a finalized vote or nothing, but just kind of help engage, what you viewers want to see, which team for my dynasty. But I'll list them again real quick, the ones I'm considering. In the Big 10, either Rutgers or Minnesota most likely. In the SEC, we're talking most likely Vandy, South Carolina, Arkansas, or Mississippi State. In the ACC, we're looking at Cal, Stanford, or Boston College. And in the Big 12, most likely Arizona State, or maybe BYU or Cincinnati. But yeah, man, like I said, comment below which team you'd be most interested in seeing me do for Dynasty. And then we'll, wrap things up by talking about some other interesting things I think you could do. That was, what I want to do, right? Now, some things you could do, or, some things I might do later on with the simulation style stuff with some of these teams. But I'll start off with, the Pac-12, which is now the Pac-2. Oregon State and Washington State. Not sure why they didn't join a conference like every other team in that conference did. They all, dispersed between the Big 10, ACC, Big 12, etc. But yeah, they're pretty much playing mostly Mountain West teams and maybe a couple old Pac-12 teams as well. So yeah, man, Oregon State and Washington State, 2 teams that I think would be interesting to do. Something you could do is either, take those teams, get them in a conference, or maybe even rebuild that Pac-12. Maybe you never get it back to 12 teams, but maybe you could at least get it back to 10. And it doesn't have to be, bringing back all the Pac-12 schools that just left. You could even, maybe steal a couple Mountain West teams, American Athletic Conference teams, Conference USA teams. Who knows, man? You could go all over the place with it. But that's just, something interesting you can do with those 2 remaining teams there. Now, some teams that are actually pretty solid already, but you might be interested in, getting them in a better conference and, maybe just a couple years to do so with a team that's, maybe more so ready than a team that needs more of a complete longer rebuild. So, we'll talk about that with, SMU was a team that I would consider, but they already joined the ACC. So, Tulane, another team that's who, lost to SMU in the AAC title game last year. So Tulane, one of those teams that you could take, or possibly even Toledo, Boise State, James Madison, Appalachian State, all interesting there. And of course, you can't forget the independent Notre Dame. Like, come on, man. They've been in conferences for other sports, man. I mean, you got Big Ten for hockey at times, ACC for basketball. You would think at some point football would join the conference, but it hasn't happened yet, man. So maybe you grab that squad, get them in a conference, see what you can do. Also, some other independent schools. You got UConn, UMass, and Army. Maybe you take one of them and throw them in there, because those would be more deeper rebuilds, not only building the squads and better rosters, but getting into a conference. Whereas with Notre Dame, yes, you're getting into a conference, but you're probably more solidified, and it wouldn't be as hard to build a squad that's ready for that type of schedule. I'll just throw some other teams out there that have some different storylines over the year that might be interesting to do, like UAB, Kent State, Charlotte, the East Carolina Pirates. You got FIU, Sam Houston State, Jacksonville State, Marshall, Southern Miss, UL Monroe. But yeah, man, just throwing some teams out there. I think that's pretty much going to do it, though. Just wanted to have a nice Dynasty discussion today. Like I said, though, comment below which team of the ones I was considering that you would most like me to see. And I'll probably end up formulating like a top 3 or top 5 once we get closer to the game release. And we'll throw a vote out there and figure out, which team we're going to dial it in with for my Dynasty this season. But yeah, man, comment below your thoughts as well on, the articles I went over and, all the details we've got for this mode so far. I'm definitely expecting the deep dive for Dynasty to be out hopefully this week. If not, it'll probably be the following week. But we should get a video each on Dynasty and Road to Glory at some point going forward. And I'm sure they'll probably end with Ultimate Team closer to the release, since they know that we're all not that worried about it. I'm sure there are some people out there that care for it, but us true NCAA football fans, definitely not too worried about that, man. Dynasty, Road to Glory, that's what we're here for, man. So yeah, definitely excited about this game. Hope you enjoyed this video, man. Slap that like button for me if you did. I appreciate that a lot. And subscribe for more coming soon. Plenty more info for this game. Also follow me on Twitter for updates as well. Link in the description down below. That's going to do it. Have a nice day. Peace.